The girl wasn't taking the hint. "Unfortunately, young lady," he said, his voice dropping several degrees colder, "this particular car isn't available to you today." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Several customers exchanged knowing glances. A young sales associate named Daniel Miller shifted uncomfortably near the back wall, his eyes reflecting a mixture of embarrassment and helplessness. Alexis stood motionless, feeling dozens of judgmental stares converging on her from every direction. She drew a gentle breath, reclaiming her composure. What these people didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, was that the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster was intended as a birthday gift for her father, Marcus Carter, one of America's most renowned tech billionaires. But Marcus had raised her differently. "Never flaunt wealth," he would say. "Let your character speak for itself." So instead of revealing her identity, Alexis simply turned back toward the car, maintaining her dignity in silence. The tension in the showroom was palpable now, stretching like an invisible thread ready to snap at any moment. No one realized that this seemingly insignificant encounter would soon set in motion a dramatic chain of events that would change lives forever. The following morning, the staff at Boston Luxury Motors went about their usual routines. Blake Thompson savored his premium espresso, mentally calculating his commission on a Porsche sale from yesterday. The memory of the young black girl he dismissed brought a smirk to his face. Just another reminder of the clear boundaries between those who belonged in his world and those who didn't. The distant rumble came first, a deep, distinctive purr that only the most refined engines produce. Heads turned toward the sound as it grew louder, commanding attention. Through the massive glass windows, a vehicle appeared that made even veteran luxury car salespeople pause mid-sentence. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, not just any Phantom, but a special edition in midnight black with custom detailing that spoke of extraordinary wealth. Its gleaming surface reflected the morning sun like a dark mirror, the spirit of ecstasy hood ornament catching the light as it glided to a perfect stop directly in front of the main entrance. "Is that?" Richard Mason, the dealership owner, emerged from his office, eyes wide with recognition of the vehicle that cost well over $500,000. "Only a handful of those in the entire country," Blake whispered, immediately adjusting his tie and straightening his posture. This was the kind of client that careers were built on. Richard and Blake moved in perfect synchrony toward the entrance, practiced smiles in place. The showroom staff watched with bated breath as the chauffeur stepped out and opened the rear passenger door with ceremonial precision. From the Rolls-Royce emerged a distinguished black man in his late 40s, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet wealth. His presence commanded the space without effort, the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors." Blake extended his hand, voice warm with practiced charm. "I'm Blake Thompson, Senior Sales Manager. It's a privilege to have you visit our showroom today." Richard Mason, owner, Richard added quickly, stepping forward. "Whatever you're looking for, we'll ensure you find exactly what you need." The man studied them both with penetrating eyes that seemed to look straight through their polished facades. He took his time before speaking, as if weighing the value of his own words. "Marcus Carter," he finally said, his deep voice resonating with quiet authority. Blake's smile froze. The name registered immediately. Marcus Carter, founder of Carter Innovations, the renewable energy empire valued at billions. A tech visionary whose face had graced the covers of Forbes and Time. Richard's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Carter, this is truly an honor. What brings you to our humble establishment today?" Marcus Carter's gaze swept the showroom methodically before returning to Blake. "I'm here because of an incident that occurred yesterday involving someone very important to me." A chill ran down Blake's spine as an uneasy premonition formed in his mind. "Someone important to you, sir?" Blake managed, fighting to maintain his composure. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice becoming noticeably cooler. "My daughter, Alexis Carter, a young woman who visited your showroom yesterday and was treated with remarkable disrespect." The blood drained from Blake's face. Beside him, Richard Mason stiffened, shooting a questioning glance at his sales manager. Your daughter? Blake stammered, his mind racing back to the schoolgirl in the worn sneakers he had so casually dismissed. Yes, my daughter. Marcus continued, walking past Blake into the showroom, his movements unhurried yet purposeful. She came here interested in the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster, a birthday gift she was planning for me. The showroom had fallen completely silent. Every employee, every customer stood frozen, witnessing what was quickly becoming Blake Thompson's worst nightmare. Mr. Carter, Blake began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. There must have been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding at all. Marcus cut him off firmly. My daughter described the situation quite clearly. She was judged by her appearance, mocked for her interest in the vehicle, and ultimately denied service. Marcus stopped in front of the very Lamborghini Alexis had admired. What's most troubling isn't that you failed to make a sale, Mr. Thompson. It's that you failed to recognize the basic dignity every person deserves, regardless of how they look or what they wear. Richard Mason stepped forward, his face ashen. Mr. Carter, I assure you this is not how we conduct business. If there was any misunderstanding, it wasn't a misunderstanding, a voice called out from across the showroom. All eyes turned to Daniel Miller, the young sales associate who had approached Alexis briefly before Blake had sent him away. Daniel's face was flushed, but his eyes were resolute as he stepped forward. I was there, Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. Ms. Carter was polite and genuinely interested in the vehicle. Mr. Thompson dismissed her because of how she looked, and he hesitated before adding, because of her race. Blake's eyes flashed with fury. Daniel, that's enough. No, it's not enough, Daniel countered, years of witnessed injustices finally finding voice. Everyone here knows this happens regularly. Customers are judged within seconds based on appearance, especially if they're people of color. Marcus Carter's expression softened slightly as he looked at Daniel. Thank you for your honesty, young man. It takes courage to speak truth in difficult moments. Turning back to Blake and Richard, Marcus's expression hardened again. I didn't come here today simply to embarrass you or demand an apology. I came because actions have consequences, and it's time you experience some. He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a business card, handing it to Richard Mason. This is the address of the Carter Foundation, where we provide support and opportunities for underprivileged youth in Boston. Starting tomorrow, both of you will volunteer there for the next 2 weeks. Volunteer, Blake repeated incredulously. Mr. Carter, with all due respect, we run a business here, and I run several. Marcus interrupted smoothly. Yet I still find time to remember that wealth and status are privileges, not entitlements. Consider this an educational opportunity rather than a punishment. Richard Mason, recognizing the severity of the situation, quickly accepted the card. We'll be there, Mr. Carter. I personally guarantee it. Marcus nodded, then turned to leave, but paused after a few steps. One more thing, he said, looking back at the stunned showroom. My company is currently replacing our entire executive fleet, approximately 30 vehicles. I was considering Boston Luxury Motors for this contract. The word was hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Mr. Carter, Richard began desperately. Please reconsider. I believe in second chances, Mr. Mason, Marcus replied calmly. But they must be earned through actions, not words. I'll make my final decision after the 2 weeks. As Marcus Carter walked back toward his Rolls-Royce, Blake Thompson stood frozen in place, watching his professional world crumble around him. For the first time in his career, he was experiencing something he had inflicted on countless others, the sting of being judged and found wanting. What Blake couldn't yet understand was that Marcus Carter hadn't come seeking revenge. He had come offering something far more valuable, the opportunity for genuine transformation. The Carter Foundation stood in stark contrast to the gleaming luxury of Boston Luxury Motors. The 2-story brick building, while clean and well-maintained, bore the honest marks of daily use by the children it served. A colorful mural depicting diverse children holding hands stretched across one exterior wall, The words dignity, opportunity, community painted in bold letters above the entrance. Blake Thompson pulled his Mercedes into the small parking lot, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. He'd spent the previous evening alternating between rage and disbelief, his mind cycling through all the ways his career might be salvaged from this disaster. The thought of spending 2 weeks in this place, this charity in a neighborhood he'd never voluntarily visit, felt like a personal affront. Richard Mason's Audi pulled in beside him. The dealership owner looked equally uncomfortable, though he'd at least made an effort to dress more casually in khakis and a button-down shirt. Blake, still defiant, wore his designer suit like armor. "Let's just get this over with," Blake muttered as they approached the entrance. 2 weeks of community service, then back to normal. Richard shook his head. "Nothing about this is normal, Blake. Marcus Carter could single-handedly make or break our dealership. We need to take this seriously." Inside, the Foundation's main room buzzed with activity. About 20 children of various ages worked at tables or played in designated areas, supervised by staff members who moved between groups with practiced ease. The walls were covered with children's artwork and motivational quotes. The space felt warm, purposeful, and entirely foreign to Blake. Linda Harris, the center's director, greeted them at the entrance. In her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that missed nothing, she extended her hand with a genuine smile. "Mr. Mason, Mr. Thompson, welcome to the Carter Foundation. Marcus called to let me know you'd be joining us. I appreciate your willingness to volunteer." Richard shook her hand warmly. "Thank you for having us, Ms. Harris. We're looking forward to helping however we can." Blake offered a stiff nod and a limp handshake, his eyes already scanning for the least demanding corner of the room. "Let me show you around," Linda continued, either missing or choosing to ignore Blake's reluctance. "Our mission here is to provide educational support, mentorship, and a safe environment for children who might otherwise lack these resources." As they followed her through the center, Blake maintained a careful distance from the children, as if their circumstances might somehow be contagious. Richard, meanwhile, made an effort to smile and acknowledge the curious glances directed their way. "Most of our children come from single-parent households or families facing economic challenges," Linda explained. "Some have experienced homelessness. Others have parents working multiple jobs. What they all share is potential that deserves nurturing." She stopped near a small library area. "Mr. Thompson, you mentioned on your volunteer form that you have a business degree from Wharton. Perhaps you could help with our financial literacy program? Many of our older children are interested in learning about saving, investing, and entrepreneurship." Blake's eyebrows rose slightly. "I doubt these kids need to know about investment portfolios." The words escaped before he could filter them, drawing a sharp look from Richard and a measured response from Linda. "On the contrary," she replied evenly, "many of our children have entrepreneurial ambitions. Just last month, one of our 14-year-olds started a neighborhood lawn care service that's already turning a profit. Knowledge isn't exclusive to privilege, Mr. Thompson." Blake felt his face warm with something that might have been shame, but he quickly suppressed it. "Fine, whatever you need." "Mr. Mason," Linda continued, "perhaps you could assist with our reading program? We're always looking for adults to listen to the younger children practice." "I'd be happy to," Richard replied, seeming genuinely interested. As Linda walked away to handle a situation with 2 arguing children, Blake leaned against the wall, arms crossed defensively across his chest. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I'm a sales manager for luxury vehicles, not a babysitter." Richard sighed. "Blake, for once, just try. Our entire dealership is at stake. Because of some spoiled rich girl who couldn't handle being told no," Blake retorted, though with less conviction than before. "No," Richard corrected him firmly. "Because you judge someone based on appearance rather than treating them with basic respect. That's on you, not her." Before Blake could respond, a small voice interrupted them. "Excuse me, sir. Are you new here?" Blake looked down to find a black boy of about 8 standing before him. The child wore a faded blue t-shirt, jeans with patches at the knees, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. Despite his modest appearance, His eyes shone with curiosity and an unexpected confidence. "What's it to you?" Blake replied, unable to soften his tone even for a child. The boy seemed unfazed. "I'm Thomas. I help new people find their way around. Ms. Linda says I'm the unofficial welcome committee." He extended his small hand formally. "What's your name?" Something about the boy's direct gaze made it impossible for Blake to simply dismiss him. Reluctantly, he shook the offered hand. "Blake Thompson." "That's a nice name," Thomas said sincerely. "Are you good at math?" "I need help with fractions, and Ms. Jessie is busy with the younger kids today." Blake glanced around desperately for an escape route, but Richard had already wandered off toward the reading corner, and Linda was occupied across the room. "I don't think," Blake began. "Please." Thomas persisted. "I have a test on Friday, and I really want to get an A. My mom always says education is the key to opportunities." Blake found himself following Thomas to a small table in the corner, where a math workbook lay open beside a pencil case held together with duct tape. As Thomas explained his difficulty understanding how to add fractions with different denominators, Blake felt an unexpected twinge of something, perhaps the memory of his own father patiently helping him with homework long ago. "You need to find a common denominator first," Blake explained, reaching for a piece of paper. "Look, if you have 1/4 and 1/3, you need to find a number that both 4 and 3 go into." "Like 12?" Thomas asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Exactly," Blake nodded, surprised by the quick response. "So 1/4 becomes March 12th, and 1/3 becomes April 12th. Now you can add them directly." Thomas's face lit up with understanding. "So that's July 12th. I get it now." For the briefest moment, Blake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The simple satisfaction of helping someone without expectation of reward. The feeling was so foreign that he immediately dismissed it, standing up abruptly. "You should be fine now," he said, retreating to his professional distance. "Thank you, Mr. Blake," Thomas replied earnestly. "Will you be here tomorrow too? I have more fractions to learn." Blake hesitated, caught between his instinctive desire to escape and the unexpected pull of the boy's hopeful expression. "I'll be here for 2 weeks," he finally admitted. "That's great." Thomas grinned. "I can show you my science project tomorrow. I'm building a solar-powered car from recycled materials." As Blake walked away, he found himself disturbed by how easily Thomas had broken through his carefully constructed barriers, if only for a moment. He'd spent years cultivating an image of success built on luxury, exclusivity, and social status. The idea that a child in worn-out sneakers could offer him anything of value contradicted everything he believed about the world. Yet, as the day progressed, Blake found himself repeatedly drawn to Thomas's corner of the room, watching how the boy interacted with others, offering to share his limited supplies, encouraging younger children, approaching every challenge with determined optimism. By the time Blake and Richard prepared to leave, something had shifted almost imperceptibly in Blake's perception. He wouldn't have admitted it. Not to Richard, not to anyone, and certainly not to himself. But a tiny crack had formed in the foundation of his prejudices, allowing in the first glimmer of doubt about the values he had held so dear. As they walked to their cars, Richard commented, "That wasn't so bad, was it?" Blake merely grunted, unwilling to acknowledge the confusion stirring within him. "See you tomorrow," Richard called as he got into his Audi. Blake sat in his Mercedes for several minutes before starting the engine, his mind replaying the image of Thomas's bright, determined eyes as he worked through those fraction problems. For the first time in years, Blake Thompson found himself questioning not just his actions of the previous day, but the entire framework of judgments that had guided his life for so long. The realization was as uncomfortable as it was unwelcome. By the 5th day at the Carter Foundation, Blake Thompson had established a reluctant routine. He arrived at precisely 9 a.m., helped Thomas with math for an hour, assisted with a financial literacy program for teenagers, and then retreated to whatever administrative tasks Linda could find for him. Anything to avoid the uncomfortable warmth he felt when interacting directly with the children. Today, however, something was different. Thomas wasn't at his usual table. He's in the back courtyard. Jessie, one of the regular volunteers, informed Blake when she noticed him scanning the room. His backpack ripped completely open this morning. He's trying to fix it. Blake nodded, telling himself he was merely curious as he made his way through the building to the small concrete courtyard where a few picnic tables stood beneath a weather-worn awning. Thomas sat alone, hunched over a tattered navy backpack, meticulously applying strips of duct tape to a seam that had split completely open. School supplies lay scattered around him: worn textbooks, a plastic pencil case, a calculator with a cracked screen. "Why don't you just get a new one?" Blake asked, the words escaping before he could consider how they might sound. Thomas looked up, his face brightening at the sight of Blake, despite the frustration evident in his furrowed brow. "Mr. Blake, I didn't hear you come out." "Your backpack," Blake clarified, gesturing at the hopeless repair job. "Wouldn't it be easier to replace it?" Thomas's fingers continued working with the tape as he answered. "This was my mom's last gift to me before she passed away 2 years ago. She saved up for it specially because I was starting a new school." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Blake felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "Your mother," he began, unsure how to continue. "Cancer," Thomas supplied matter-of-factly, though his eyes reflected a depth of loss that seemed impossibly profound for someone so young. "It was just me and her. Now I live with my grandma, but she can't work much because of her arthritis." Blake lowered himself onto the bench across from Thomas, watching the boy's careful, deliberate movements as he continued his repair efforts. "I could," Blake hesitated, then continued. "I could get you a new backpack, if you wanted." Thomas looked up, studying Blake's face with surprising intensity. "That's really nice of you, Mr. Blake, but this one is special to me. Every time I use it, I remember how Mom always told me education would take me places she never got to go." Blake nodded, suddenly at a loss for words. In his world, possessions were status symbols, easily replaced when they no longer served their purpose or when something more impressive came along. The idea of treasuring something not for its monetary value, but for its emotional significance was foreign territory. "Does it bother you?" Blake asked after a moment, the question surprising even himself. "Does what bother me? That other kids have new things, better things." Blake gestured vaguely. "Doesn't it make you angry that life is unfair?" Thomas set down his tape, considering the question with a seriousness that seemed beyond his years. "Sometimes it's hard," he admitted, "especially when kids at school make fun of my clothes or when I can't join field trips because grandma can't afford the fees." He picked up the backpack again, running his fingers over the newly repaired seam. "But my mom always said that being angry about what you don't have just steals the joy from what you do have." Blake felt a strange sensation, as if the ground beneath him had shifted imperceptibly. He thought of his own life, the luxury apartment filled with expensive furniture he barely noticed, the designer clothes that brought only momentary satisfaction, the constant striving for more, better, exclusive. "That's a wise perspective," he managed. Thomas shrugged. "I'm still working on it. Yesterday, I felt pretty jealous when Malik showed up with new basketball shoes." He grinned suddenly, but then he let me try them on, and they were too tight anyway. The boy's laughter was infectious, and Blake found himself smiling despite the uncomfortable self-awareness growing within him. "Mr. Blake?" Thomas asked, his expression turning serious again. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you seem so angry when you first came here? Did someone make you come?" The direct question caught Blake off guard. His instinct was to deflect, to offer the polished, superficial responses he used in his professional life. But something about Thomas's honest curiosity made such evasions seem suddenly inadequate. "Yes," he admitted. "Someone important insisted that I volunteer here. As a punishment." Thomas pressed. Blake winced at the accuracy. "Something like that." "For what?" Blake hesitated, the memory of Alexis Carter's dignified exit from the showroom flashing in his mind. For the first time, he saw the scene not from his perspective, but from hers, a young woman subjected to public humiliation simply because she didn't fit his narrow definition of who belonged in his world. "I was unkind to someone," he said finally. "I judged them based on how they looked rather than who they were." Thomas nodded sagely. My grandma says that's the easiest mistake to make and the hardest one to fix. Your grandma sounds smart. She is. Thomas beamed. She also says that saying sorry is just the beginning. You have to change your actions too. Blake felt the weight of those words settle on him. He'd sent a text message apology to Alexis Carter 3 days ago, a brief acknowledgement of wrongdoing that had received no response. At the time, he'd felt frustrated by the lack of reply, as if his minimal effort deserved immediate absolution. Now, sitting across from an 8-year-old boy who faced daily challenges with more grace and wisdom than Blake had demonstrated in his entire adult life, that text message seemed pathetically inadequate. Thomas, Blake said slowly, how would you feel about helping me with a project tomorrow? Something important. Thomas's eyes lit up. Like what? Like helping me understand how to really make things right when I've hurt someone. The boy considered this seriously before nodding. I can do that. But first, can you help me with my science homework? We're learning about renewable energy, and I don't understand how solar panels work. As Blake began explaining photovoltaic cells in terms an 8-year-old could understand, he realized with startling clarity that he was receiving far more from Thomas than he was giving. The boy had somehow bypassed all of Blake's carefully constructed defenses, challenging his assumptions not through confrontation, but through simple, authentic human connection. Later that evening, Blake sat in his luxury apartment, surrounded by the trappings of success that had once seemed so important. He opened his laptop and began researching Marcus Carter more thoroughly, not as a potential client, but as a person. What he discovered humbled him further. Marcus Carter had grown up in poverty, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to support him. Despite facing racial discrimination and financial hardships, he had earned scholarships, built a renewable energy company from nothing, and dedicated a significant portion of his wealth to creating opportunities for disadvantaged children. The man Blake had resented for forcing him into community service had himself emerged from circumstances far more challenging than anything Blake had ever faced. Blake closed his laptop and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment. The city lights sparkled below, beautiful but suddenly seeming less important than they had just a week ago. He picked up his phone and composed a new message to Alexis Carter. Alexis, my previous apology was inadequate. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse for my behavior. I'm learning, slowly, to recognize my prejudices and to see people for who they truly are. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your dignity in the face of my disrespect has helped change me for the better. Blake Thompson. He hesitated only briefly before pressing send, no longer expecting or demanding a response. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Blake Thompson was beginning to understand that some of the most important things in life couldn't be purchased, possessed, or controlled. They could only be earned through genuine respect, humility, and the courage to change. The grand ballroom of the Bostonian hotel shimmered with understated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with arrangements of white orchids and blue hydrangeas. A string quartet played softly in the corner as Boston's elite mingled, champagne flutes in hand, at the annual Carter Foundation Charity Gala. Blake Thompson adjusted his bow tie nervously as he entered. Despite his custom tuxedo and the familiar surroundings of luxury, he felt oddly out of place, an imposter in a world he once navigated with easy confidence. 2 weeks at the Carter Foundation had shifted something fundamental within him, leaving him uncertain of his footing in what should have been comfortable territory. Richard Mason appeared at his side, looking equally tense. Marcus Carter just arrived, he murmured. The board's decision about our dealership contract will be announced tonight. Blake nodded, his eyes scanning the room until they found Marcus Carter, commanding attention without effort as he greeted guests with genuine warmth. Beside him stood a young woman in a simple but elegant midnight blue gown, Alexis Carter. Seeing her in this context, Blake was struck by how completely he had misjudged her that day in the showroom. Here, among Boston's wealthiest and most influential citizens, Alexis carried herself with the same quiet dignity she had shown when facing his contempt. There was no pretension in her manner, no desperate attempt to prove she belonged. She simply did. "I need to speak with her," Blake said suddenly. Richard looked alarmed. "Blake, is that wise? We're already on thin ice." "This isn't about the contract," Blake interrupted. "This is about doing what's right." Before Richard could object further, Blake made his way across the ballroom, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar anxiety. As he approached, Alexis turned, her expression revealing momentary surprise before settling into careful neutrality. "Miss Carter," Blake began, his practice sales pitch confidence nowhere to be found. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Alexis studied him, her intelligent eyes seeming to look straight through his carefully composed exterior. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "Of course, Mr. Thompson." They moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the main crowd. Blake took a deep breath, suddenly aware that all his years of smooth talking had left him ill-prepared for genuine conversation. "I wanted to thank you for reading my message," he began awkwardly, "and to apologize again, in person this time." "You've already apologized twice, Mr. Thompson," Alexis replied, her voice neither cold nor particularly warm. "Is there something else you wanted to say?" Blake hesitated, the carefully rehearsed speech he'd prepared suddenly seeming hollow and inadequate. Instead, he found himself speaking from a place of unexpected honesty. "I've spent the past 2 weeks at your father's foundation," he said. "At first, I resented being there. I saw it as punishment, as something beneath me." He paused, the admission difficult but necessary. "I was wrong about so many things." Alexis remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "There's a boy there, Thomas. He's 8 years old, and he's taught me more about dignity and resilience in 2 weeks than I've learned in my entire life." Blake's voice grew steadier as he continued. "His mother died of cancer 2 years ago. He lives with his grandmother, who can barely make ends meet. And yet, he approaches each day with more joy and generosity than I've ever shown." Blake met Alexis's gaze directly. "The day you came into the showroom, I didn't see you. I saw a category, a stereotype I could dismiss without a second thought. I didn't just fail as a salesperson. I failed as a human being." For the first time, Alexis's expression softened slightly. "What made you realize that, Mr. Thompson?" "Watching Thomas," Blake replied honestly. "Seeing how he treasures a worn-out backpack because it was his mother's last gift to him. Realizing that I've spent years chasing status and possessions that have never brought me the kind of joy he finds in simple kindness." He shook his head. "And then researching your father's story, how he overcame obstacles I've never had to face and still chose to help others rather than simply enjoying his success." Alexis nodded thoughtfully. "My father has always taught me that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. That's why I was at your dealership that day. Not to flaunt money, but to find something meaningful for someone I love." "I understand that now," Blake said quietly. "And I want you to know that what happened that day has changed me. Not just because of the consequences, but because it forced me to confront parts of myself I've been ignoring for too long." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with the soft music and distant conversations of the gala around them. "I believe you," Alexis said finally. "Not because of your words, but because I can see the change in you." She offered a small but genuine smile. "My father always says that true transformation isn't about feeling guilty. It's about becoming better." Blake felt an unexpected weight lift from his shoulders. "Your father is a wise man." "He is," Alexis agreed, "and more forgiving than most people would be in his position." She glanced across the room to where Marcus was now making his way toward the stage. "I think he's about to make his announcement." The ballroom quieted as Marcus Carter took the stage, the spotlight highlighting the quiet authority in his bearing. He thanked everyone for their attendance and support of the foundation before turning to more specific matters. "Tonight, I'd like to address something important," Marcus began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room. 2 weeks ago, an incident occurred that reminded me how much work we still have to do in creating a truly equitable society." Blake felt dozens of eyes turn in his direction, heat rising to his face. He resisted the urge to look away, forcing himself to accept the public acknowledgement of his failure. My daughter Alexis was judged, dismissed, and humiliated simply because of how she looked and the color of her skin, Marcus continued. This happened at Boston Luxury Motors, a business I was considering for a substantial contract. Richard Mason, standing nearby, visibly tensed. Blake could almost feel the dealership owner's anxiety radiating across the space between them. I required the manager responsible and the dealership owner to volunteer at our foundation for the past 2 weeks, Marcus explained. Not as punishment, but as an opportunity for growth and understanding. Marcus's gaze found Blake in the crowd, his expression thoughtful. Tonight, I'm prepared to announce my decision regarding the fleet contract for Carter Innovations executive vehicles. The room fell completely silent. Blake found himself holding his breath, though strangely, the outcome seemed less important than it had just days before. I've decided to award a portion of the contract to Boston Luxury Motors, Marcus announced. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as he continued. Not the full contract as originally discussed, but enough to demonstrate that I believe in second chances when they're earned through genuine change. Richard Mason's relief was palpable. Blake, however, felt something more complex, not simply relief at avoiding professional disaster, but a deeper appreciation for the mercy being extended to him. I've made this decision, Marcus continued, because I've seen evidence of real transformation. True change isn't measured in apologies or promises, but in actions and commitment to doing better. As Marcus concluded his speech to enthusiastic applause, Blake turned to find Alexis watching him carefully. Your father didn't have to do that, he said quietly. No, he didn't, she agreed. But that's who he is. He believes that when we know better, we should do better. Blake nodded, a new resolve settling within him. I'd like to continue volunteering at the foundation, he said. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Thomas is counting on me to help with his science fair project next month. Alexis smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. I think that would be wonderful, Mr. Thompson. Blake, he corrected gently. Please call me Blake. Blake, she acknowledged with a nod. And I'm Alexis. As the evening continued, Blake found himself engaged in conversations unlike any he'd had at similar events before, discussing the foundation's work, listening more than speaking, seeing people as individuals rather than potential sales or social connections. Later, as the gala was winding down, Marcus Carter approached him directly. Mr. Thompson, he said, extending his hand. I hope you understand the significance of my decision tonight. Blake shook his hand firmly. I do, sir. And I want to thank you, not just for the contract, but for the opportunity these past 2 weeks have given me. Marcus studied him thoughtfully. The true measure of this experience won't be what happened tonight, but what you do tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. I understand, Blake replied, and I'm committed to continuing what I've started. Marcus nodded, satisfied. Then perhaps something valuable has come from that difficult day after all. He paused before adding, Thomas speaks very highly of you, by the way. That boy has an excellent judge of character. As Marcus moved away to speak with other guests, Blake stood alone for a moment, contemplating how completely his life had changed in just 2 weeks. The luxury cars, the exclusive client list, the trappings of success he had pursued so relentlessly. None of it seemed as important as the simple respect he had earned from an 8-year-old boy who had every reason to judge him harshly. For the first time in his adult life, Blake Thompson felt the quiet satisfaction of becoming someone he could actually respect, not for what he owned or what status he held, but for who he was choosing to become. 6 months after the Carter Foundation Gala, Boston Luxury Motors had undergone a transformation that went far beyond its newly renovated showroom. The changes were subtle yet profound, evident in everything from the staff training protocols to the warm greeting extended to every customer who walked through the doors, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. Blake Thompson stood near the center of the showroom, watching as Daniel Miller, recently promoted to senior sales associate, guided an elderly couple through the features of a modest sedan. Daniel's genuine enthusiasm wasn't reserved for high-end purchases. He brought the same respectful attention to every client interaction. They're going with the Lexus ES, Richard Mason commented, joining Blake. Not exactly our highest commission, but Daniel's built quite a loyal customer base. Blake nodded. Their grandson just got accepted to MIT. They wanted something reliable for visiting him. Richard raised an eyebrow. You've been talking with them too? They reminded me of Thomas's grandmother, Blake explained. She mentioned wanting to visit him when he goes to college someday. Got me thinking about how we could help with transportation options for the foundation families. Richard smiled, still occasionally surprised by the changes in his sales manager. Speaking of the foundation, how's the mentorship program coming along? We've got 15 dealership employees signed up as volunteer mentors now, Blake replied, a note of pride in his voice. The financial literacy workshops are oversubscribed. Turns out our staff has a lot to offer when they're not solely focused on luxury sales. The program had been Blake's initiative, a structured partnership between Boston Luxury Motors and the Carter Foundation that provided career exposure, educational support, and mentorship to the foundation's children. What had begun as a personal commitment had gradually expanded to involve nearly half the dealership's staff. Marcus Carter called this morning, Richard said, lowering his voice slightly. The executive fleet contract is up for renewal next quarter. Blake nodded, understanding the significance. After the events of 6 months ago, Marcus had awarded them only 30% of the original contract, enough to signal faith in their potential for change, but not enough to let them off the hook entirely. He mentioned he's been hearing good things about our diversity initiatives and community engagement, Richard continued. Seems your work hasn't gone unnoticed. It's not about the contract anymore, Blake replied honestly, though I won't pretend it wouldn't be welcome. Richard clapped him on the shoulder. You've changed this place, Blake, for the better. As Richard walked away to greet new customers, Blake's phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from Thomas. Mr. Blake, guess what? I got an A+ on my renewable energy project. Ms. Jessie says I might get to present it at the science fair next month. Can you help me practice my presentation this Saturday? Blake smiled, quickly typing his reply. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Congratulations, Thomas. Your mom would be incredibly proud. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, reflecting on how completely his life had changed since that fateful day when Alexis Carter had walked into the showroom. What had begun as the most humiliating professional experience of his career had somehow become the catalyst for the most meaningful personal transformation. The showroom doors slid open, and Blake looked up to see a young black woman in a simple hijab enter hesitantly, glancing around with the uncertain air of someone who wasn't sure they belonged. 6 months ago, she might have been ignored or subtly made to feel unwelcome. Today, Blake approached her with a genuine smile. Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors, he said warmly. I'm Blake Thompson. How can I help you today? The woman's tension visibly eased at his friendly greeting. I'm Dr. Amina Hassan. I just completed my medical residency, and I'm looking for my first car. Nothing too extravagant, but something reliable. Congratulations, Dr. Hassan. That's a tremendous achievement, Blake replied, gesturing toward the showroom. I'd be happy to show you some options that might suit your needs. What's most important to you in a vehicle? As they walked through the showroom, Blake found himself thinking of the weekly diversity and inclusion workshops he'd implemented for the staff. What had initially been met with eye-rolling and reluctance had gradually evolved into meaningful conversations about unconscious bias and the importance of creating a welcoming environment for all customers. Later that afternoon, after helping Dr. Hassan find a vehicle that perfectly matched her needs and budget, Blake drove to the Carter Foundation for his regular volunteer session. The familiar brick building now felt like a second home, a place where he was known not as the luxury car salesman, but simply as Mr. Blake, Thomas's mentor and the guy who could explain complex math problems in ways that actually made sense. Thomas was waiting at their usual table, surrounded by carefully labeled diagrams for his science fair presentation. His face lit up when he saw Blake. Mr. Blake, I added a whole new section about solar energy storage solutions. Did you know that's what Alexis's dad's company specializes in? She told me all about it when she visited yesterday. Blake smiled, settling into the chair across from Thomas. I didn't know that. Carter Innovations is revolutionizing how we store renewable energy. Alexis says I could intern there someday, if I keep my grades up. Thomas continued excitedly. She thinks I have a natural aptitude for engineering. She's absolutely right, Blake agreed, feeling a surge of pride in the boy's accomplishments. Thomas had blossomed over the past months. His natural intelligence, nurtured by the consistent support and encouragement he received from the Foundation's expanded resources. As they worked through Thomas's presentation, Blake occasionally glanced around the room that had once felt so foreign to him. Now he recognized every child by name, knew their strengths and challenges, celebrated their victories, and helped them through their disappointments. "Mr. Blake?" Thomas asked, interrupting Blake's thoughts. "Can I ask you something important?" "Of course." Thomas fidgeted with his pencil for a moment before looking up. "My grandma's birthday is next month. I've been saving my allowance, but I don't think it's enough for what I want to get her." "What did you have in mind?" Blake asked. "She always has to take 3 different buses to get to her doctor's appointments," Thomas explained. "I thought maybe I could get her a taxi gift card or something, but they're expensive." Blake considered this thoughtfully. "What if we came up with something better than a taxi?" The Foundation has been developing a volunteer driver program for family members. It's not officially launched yet, but I think we could make a special arrangement for your grandmother. Thomas's eyes widened. "Really? You could do that?" "We can definitely try," Blake assured him. "And in the meantime, I have some connections at a rideshare company. Perhaps we could arrange for a special birthday package of prepaid rides." The boy's face lit up with excitement and relief. "That would be amazing. Grandma always says her joints hurt worse on bus days." As Thomas returned to organizing his presentation materials, Blake found himself reflecting on how profoundly his definition of success had changed. 6 months ago, success meant closing deals on luxury vehicles, maintaining his position in Boston's elite social circles, and accumulating the trappings of wealth and status. Now, success looked like the smile on Thomas's face when he mastered a difficult concept. It looked like the Carter Foundation's expanded programs, partially funded by Boston Luxury Motors' new community investment initiative. It looked like the growing diversity of both the dealership's staff and client base, and the genuine relationships being built across boundaries of race, class, and background. Later that evening, as Blake was preparing to leave, Linda Harris approached him with a warm smile. "Blake, I've been meaning to tell you. Marcus Carter mentioned he's been impressed with the changes at the dealership." Blake nodded, somewhat embarrassed by the praise. "We still have a long way to go." "Don't we all?" Linda agreed. "But direction matters more than perfection. The mentorship program you've established is making a real difference for our kids." "They're making a real difference for us too," Blake replied honestly. "I never expected to find such fulfillment in volunteer work." Linda studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You know, when you first arrived here, practically radiating resentment, I had my doubts about Marcus's approach. I wondered if forcing someone to volunteer could ever lead to genuine change." Blake chuckled. "I was quite the reluctant volunteer, wasn't I?" "The most reluctant I'd ever seen," Linda confirmed with a smile. "Which makes the transformation all the more remarkable." As Blake drove home that evening, he took a different route, one that passed through neighborhoods he would have avoided 6 months earlier. Now, he saw not just statistics or stereotypes, but communities of people with their own stories, challenges, and strengths. His phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was Alexis Carter. "Blake, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," she began. "Not at all," he assured her. "I just finished at the Foundation." Thomas is ready to dazzle everyone with his renewable energy presentation. Alexis laughed. "That doesn't surprise me at all. He's incredibly bright." She paused before continuing. "Actually, that's related to why I'm calling. My father and I have been discussing the expansion of the Foundation's educational programs, particularly in STEM fields. We'd like to establish a formal scholarship program for students like Thomas, and we thought you might be interested in helping shape it." Blake felt a surge of excitement at the prospect. "I'd be honored. Thomas has mentioned his interest in engineering several times." "Perfect," Alexis replied. "And there's one more thing. Dad's planning to host a small dinner next week to discuss the future of the Boston Luxury Motors partnership. The fleet contract is coming up for renewal, and he's considering some significant expansions to our collaboration." "That's Unexpected good news, Blake admitted. Richard mentioned Marcus had called, but I didn't realize he was considering expanding the contract. The changes you've implemented haven't gone unnoticed, Alexis said. Not just the diversity initiatives and community outreach, but the fundamental shift in how the dealership operates. Dad believes in recognizing and rewarding genuine transformation. After they'd finalized the dinner details and ended the call, Blake sat in his parked car for a few moments, contemplating the journey of the past 6 months. He thought about Alexis walking into the showroom that day, maintaining her dignity despite his contempt. He thought about Marcus Carter's approach to justice, not seeking punishment but transformation. He thought about Thomas, whose resilience and optimism had opened Blake's eyes to a different way of measuring success and worth. The luxury penthouse Blake returned to each night now felt different too. He'd begun to see it not just as a symbol of personal achievement, but as a resource, hosting fundraisers for the foundation, providing a space for mentorship program planning meetings, and even inviting Thomas and his grandmother for dinner to celebrate the boys' academic achievements. As Blake entered his apartment, he noticed the framed photograph on his entry table, Thomas proudly holding his first-place science fair certificate, Blake's arm around his shoulders, both of them beaming with shared joy. Beside it stood a handwritten note from Marcus Carter. True wealth is measured by the lives we touch, not the things we possess. 6 months ago, Blake Thompson had been a man who judged others based on appearance and status, who measured his worth through material success and social position. Today, he was still learning, still growing, still making mistakes, and finding his way toward a more authentic life. But one thing had become absolutely clear. The day Alexis Carter walked into Boston Luxury Motors hadn't been the worst day of his career as he'd initially thought. It had been the first day of a journey toward becoming someone he could genuinely respect, not for what he owned or what status he held, but for who he was choosing to become. And that, Blake now understood, was the most valuable transformation of all.